If you've never run hounds in the dark, you may not understand what I'm about to describe. Not the mechanics of it. Those are easy enough to explain. You release your dogs at the trailhead, they cast through the timber picking up scent, they jump a deer, and the chase begins. And you track the chase by sound, by the voices of your dogs carrying through the night air, telling you what they've found and where they're going and how the deer is running. The mechanics are simple. What is not simple is the language. A good hound runs with a voice, not just any voice, a specific individual voice that is distinct and recognizable as a human voice, that tells you things a simple bark cannot. The dogman who has run the same lead dog for 5, 10, 40 years has learned that voice the way a musician learns an instrument. Not just what it is capable of, but what each specific utterance means, what it indicates about the terrain ahead and the deer's behavior and the relative difficulty of the chase. A cold trail sounds different from a fresh one. A deer that has crossed water sounds different from a deer that went over a ridge. A deer running clean sounds different from a deer that is going to ground. A dog that has encountered a predator sounds different from any of those. And a dog that has encountered something outside every category of its experience, something it has no name for, no behavioral template for, no 40,000 years of selective breeding to prepare it for, sounds different from everything. Different in a way that you have never heard before. Different in a way that tells you with complete certainty that what your dog is at is not a deer, and is not a bear, and is not anything you have sent a dog toward in 40 years of hound running. Luther Phelps heard that sound on a January night in Carroll County, Virginia. He went toward it. He tells people that was a mistake. He also tells people he would do it again. Both of those things are true. This is Dogman, Virginia, blood and bone. Trust your dogs, but trust them to tell you when to run. Luther Phelps was 63 years old and had been running walker hounds in Carroll County since he was 23, since his father had put a pup in his hands and told him to keep it close for the first season and learn it before he ran it. And Luther had done exactly that and had not stopped in the 40 years since. He ran 3 dogs. He had always run 3 dogs. Never fewer, never more. 3 was the right number for the terrain he hunted, the fancy gap ridgeline and the drainages on either side of it, steep and broken country where a single dog could lose a deer and 3 dogs could work cooperatively to recover the line. He bred his own stock, walker hounds from lines that went back 4 generations in his kennel, and he started every dog the same way his father had started him. Keep it close for the first season and learn it before you run it. Blue was his lead dog, 7 years old, 110 pounds, tricolor in the walker pattern with more white than most. Luther had whelped him from his best female in the spring 7 years ago and had kept him from the first because the quality was visible in the pup. The build, the nose, the specific attentiveness in the eyes that told you a dog was thinking rather than just reacting. Luther had been right. Blue was the best lead dog he had run in 40 years, and he said so plainly when people asked, without the modesty that mountain people sometimes applied to things they were proud of. He was a good dog, and you said so. Blue's voice was the central instrument of the 3-dog pack. The 2 younger males, Copper, 4 years old, and Jack, 2, ran well and were developing into reliable hunters, but they oriented to Blue in the pack hierarchy and in the field. Where Blue went, the pack went. What Blue told them about the quality of a line, they believed. When Blue turned back from a chase, the others turned too. He was the standard by which the hunt was measured. Luther knew Blue's voice the way he knew his own. He could stand at the truck at the trailhead in the dark and listen to the pack working a half-mile away and know from the sound alone what they had, how fresh it was, whether they were gaining or losing, whether the deer had gone to water or was still running open. He could tell the difference between Blue on a hot line and Blue on a moderating line, and Blue making the decision to abandon a cold trail and come in. He had heard everything Blue was capable of doing with his voice. He had never heard what Blue did on that January night. Not once, not from Blue, not from any dog he had ever run. January in Carroll County was deep into the late deer season, the last weeks before the close, the time when the herd had been pressured for 3 months and the remaining bucks were warier than they had been in October. Luther ran the dogs in January for the chase more than the harvest, the way he had always framed it to people who didn't understand why you ran hounds in the cold and the dark when you were unlikely to take a deer. The chase was the point. The music of the dogs working a line through the night timber was the point. The 40 years of knowing exactly what you were hearing was the point. He had released the pack at the Fancy Gap trailhead at 7:15, 2 hours after full dark, on a January night with temperatures in the mid-20s and a northwest wind that came straight off the ridge. Good conditions. The wind would carry deer scent downslope toward the drainage where the pack would cast first, and the cold, dry air held scent well. The pack had gone east into the timber, and within 15 minutes he heard Blue open, the deep, carrying bay that meant a deer had been jumped and the chase was on. Copper and Jack added their voices almost immediately, the pack converging on the line, and for the next hour Luther stood at the truck with his thermos of coffee and listened to the music of it. Good chase. A doe, he thought, by the way the line ran, southward along the drainage, then a long run east before the deer turned north and climbed toward the ridge crest. The pack stayed close, the gap between the lead and the deer narrow enough that the chase sounded urgent rather than casual. Good deer, good dogs, good night. At 9:20 the chase changed direction. Not gradually, a sudden sharp turn west, back toward the ridgeline above the trailhead. Luther tracked the sound of it. The pack was moving fast, the voices carrying the urgency of a close chase, heading back across terrain they had already covered. Deer sometimes doubled back. It was not unusual. He finished his coffee and listened. At 9:31, Blue stopped. Not faded, stopped. Not the gradual thinning of a chase moving out of range, but a full cessation mid-bay, as if the sound had been switched off. Luther had heard dogs lose a line before. He had heard the transition from running bark to checking bark to the uncertain, searching silence of a dog that had lost the deer's scent. That was a gradual thing, a winding down. Blue had stopped in mid-sentence. Luther put his thermos on the hood of the truck and listened. Copper and Jack had stopped too, simultaneously, not staggered the way they would have if the pack had lost the line one dog at a time. All 3 dogs silent in the same instant, as if something had cut the sound. He waited. 2 minutes. 3. Total silence from the timber. Then Blue opened again. Luther stood at the truck and listened, and the hair on his arms came up before his mind had finished processing what he was hearing. It was Blue's voice, the same pitch, the same timbre, the same individual quality that 40 years of familiarity could identify without conscious effort. Blue's voice. But not any sound Blue had made before. Not the running bark or the checking bark or the alarm bark or any of the dozen distinct vocalizations in the vocabulary Luther had cataloged over 7 years of running this dog. It was a sound somewhere between a bay and something he had no word for. Not frantic, not panicked. The worst thing about it, the thing he kept coming back to in the months and years after, was that it was not the sound of a frightened dog. It was the sound of a dog that had encountered something completely outside its understanding and was reporting that fact to its handler with the same steadiness it brought to everything else. Blue was not afraid. Blue was telling him, "I am at something. I do not know what it is. You should know about it." That's the thing about a good dog, Luther told me later. A good dog doesn't panic. It tells you what it's at, and it stays with it, and it trusts you to come. He reached into the truck cab for his rifle and his headlamp. He went toward the sound. The sound was coming from the ridgeline above the trailhead, the high timber above the point where the deer chase had turned west, a section of the Fancy Gap Ridge that Luther had run dogs through hundreds of times over 40 years. He knew the terrain cold, the switchback trail that climbed the first 300 feet, the flat shelf partway up where the old chestnut stumps clustered, the second climb through the dense laurel to the ridge crest. Blue's voice came from above the laurel, from the ridge crest or just below it. Luther climbed with his headlamp on and his rifle slung, moving at a steady pace that he had long since calibrated to be as fast as the terrain allowed without becoming careless. The January cold was severe enough that his breath fogged in the headlamp beam with each exhalation, and the ground was frozen hard underfoot, and the laurels on the upper climb were thick enough that he had to push through them with his forearm up to protect his face. Blue's voice continued, unchanged, the same sound repeated at irregular intervals, not the even spacing of a dog marking a stationary quarry, not the excited, compressed frequency of a dog working an animal that was moving, something between those patterns. The sound of a dog that had found something and was staying with it and reporting its presence. Copper and Jack were silent. Luther registered this as he climbed. The two younger dogs were not in voice at all, not coming toward him, not working the ridge above. They were somewhere below the ridge crest, between him and the top, and they were not barking. That was wrong. Copper and Jack always ran to Blue when Blue opened on something. Pack instinct. He had never known them to hold back when the lead dog was at a find. He cleared the laurels and saw the two dogs on the flat ground just below the ridge crest. They were sitting. Both of them. Sitting, not standing, facing uphill toward the ridge crest where Blue's voice was coming from. Their ears were back, their tails were down, they were looking uphill and they were not moving. He had never seen Copper or Jack sit during a night hunt. He paused at the edge of the laurels. "Hey," he said softly. Both dogs looked at him. Their expressions, he would describe this later with the care of someone choosing words for something that mattered. Their expressions were the expression of dogs who were glad their handler had arrived and were now waiting for him to decide what to do next. Not afraid, not panicked, waiting, as if they had assessed the situation and had concluded that this was the moment when the decision belonged to the man rather than the pack. He looked uphill. Blue's voice came from 20-25 yards above him, just at or just over the ridge crest. He went up. Blue was standing at the very crest of the Fancy Gap ridgeline, on a narrow strip of bare rock where the timber thinned and the sky was visible. Overcast, dark, the stars hidden, but the ambient light enough that Luther could see the dog without the headlamp. Blue was facing south, away from Luther, away from the timber they had come through, facing the south slope of the ridge which dropped steeply into the drainage below. He was not barking now. As Luther came up the last few yards to the crest, Blue's voice stopped. The dog simply stood there, nose extended toward the south slope, tail down, body still. The focused, complete attention of a dog that was tracking by scent rather than sound. Luther came to stand beside him. He put his hand on the dog's back. Blue's muscles were rigid under his palm, not trembling, rigid. The tension of a dog that was holding itself absolutely still by will rather than by ease. Luther looked south. The south slope fell away in the dark, the timber beginning again 20 yards below the crest, the drainage invisible at the bottom. Nothing visible. No movement, no sound, no light. He raised his headlamp and swept the south slope. The beam caught the timber at the slope's edge, bare hardwoods, December stripped, the ground cover of leaf litter and frost, the drainage below just visible at the limit of the headlamp's reach. Nothing. He turned the headlamp off. He stood in the dark on the Fancy Gap ridge crest with his hand on Blue's rigid back, and he listened. The sound came from below him on the south slope, not from the drainage, from somewhere on the slope between the crest and the drainage bottom, somewhere in the dark timber that the headlamp had shown him empty. He could not identify what kind of sound it was. He tried, standing in the dark with 40 years of night hunting behind the effort, and he could not place it in any category he had. Not an animal vocalization, not a footstep on frozen ground, not wind in the timber. He knew that sound thoroughly, and this was not it. Not a creak sound, or a settling timber sound, or any of the 100 sounds a ridgeline made in winter. Something else. A sound that was present, and then absent, and then present again, at intervals that were irregular in a way that felt deliberate rather than natural, as if whatever was making it was controlling the timing, as if it was listening between the sounds to hear whether he was going to respond. Blue made a single low sound against his palm, not the bark, something quieter, a vocalization Luther had never heard from a dog in his life, low, throated, the sound of a dog communicating something specific and urgent to its handler at close range. He had been around dogs long enough to understand, without knowing how he understood it, what Blue was telling him. Not, look at this thing, not, I am at something. We should go, now. Luther Phelps was not a man given to fear. 40 years in the dark on these ridges had calibrated his response to uncertainty into something functional and manageable, the steady assessment that produced action rather than paralysis. But he trusted Blue. He trusted Blue the way he had trusted his father and the way he trusted his own 63 years of experience in these mountains, not blindly, with the earned confidence of 40 years of proof. Blue had never been wrong. Blue was telling him to go. He backed away from the ridge crest. Carefully, slowly, the same careful pace you used when retreating from anything that you did not want to startle into action. Blue moved with him, heel position, staying at his side, face still angled south for the first 20 yards and then turning to match Luther's direction as they descended. At the laurels he called Copper and Jack, and both dogs came to him immediately, pressing against his legs in a way they had never done before. He got all 3 dogs to the truck. He put them up. He sat in the truck cab with the engine running and the heater going and looked at the dark ridgeline above the trailhead for a long time. The sound from the south slope did not follow him down. It stayed where it was. He drove home. Luther Phelps still runs dogs on the Fancy Gap Ridge. He has run dogs on it every January since. He will not stop running dogs on it. The ridge is his, in the sense that 40 years of walking it in the dark with hounds has made it his in the way nothing else could, and he is not going to be pushed off it by something he did not see and could not identify. But he does not run dogs above the laurel line on the Fancy Gap Ridge anymore. He runs the drainage. He runs the lower slopes. When a chase takes the pack toward the ridge crest, he calls them off and starts fresh in the morning. He told me this without embarrassment. The ridge crest is not mine, he said. Below it is mine. That is where I run dogs and where I've always had good hunting and where everything makes sense and works the way it's supposed to work. The ridge crest and above, that belongs to whatever was on the south slope that night. I don't know what it is. I don't need to know what it is. I just need to know where it is and stay on my side of where it is. I asked him what he thought Blue had told him. He thought about that carefully. A good dog doesn't tell you to be afraid, he said. Fear is not useful information. A good dog tells you what's true. Blue told me what was true. There is something above the ridge crest that is not in my understanding, and we are at its edge, and the appropriate response is to move to ground we know. He paused. That is good information. That is exactly what I needed. Blue gave me exactly what I needed, and I acted on it, and we came home and everything was fine. And if he hadn't told you to go? I asked. Luther looked at his hands. He did, he said simply. What do you think was on the south slope? He was quiet for a long time. Something that was listening, he said. That's the strongest impression I had. Not something that was hunting, not something moving through the timber on its own business that we had stumbled into. Something that was specifically listening, specifically aware that we were on the ridge crest. He looked at the window. The sound had intervals in it, like it was listening between sounds to hear whether we were going to come down the slope toward it. Were you going to? I asked. No, because Blue told me not to, and in 40 years, Blue has not been wrong. He said it with the specific, grounded certainty of a man who had built his understanding of the world from 40 years of close attention to a good dog. Some people would say a dog can't tell you that kind of thing, I said. Luther Phelps looked at me. Some people haven't run a good dog for 40 years, he said. He said it without heat, as a fact. It was. Blue died the following May, at 8 years old, of a tumor that came quickly and went worse faster. Luther was with him. He told me about it in the same measured way he told me everything, without the performed stoicism that some men brought to the loss of a dog, and without the unguarded grief that others brought, with the specific, honest acknowledgement of what he had lost and what it meant. He was the best dog I ever ran, he said. He knew things, not just scent and sound, he knew things. He knew when to push and when to give ground, and he knew that night on the ridge what the right thing was to do, and he told me, and I listened. He was quiet for a moment. I have a new pup, 9 months old. She's going to be good. I can see it already. The quality is there. I'll run her this season, keep her close the first year, learn her before I push her. Like your father taught you, I said. Like my father taught me. He looked out the window at the kennel where the new pup was. She'll never be Blue, no dog will. But she'll be her own dog, and she'll tell me what I need to know in her own voice, and I'll learn to listen to it. He paused. That's what a dog man does. You learn the voice, you trust what it tells you, and when it tells you to go, you go. He said it the way he said everything that mattered. Simply, completely. The way of a man who had paid attention his whole life to things worth paying attention to, and had been told by the best of those things what to do, and had done it. The Fancy Gap Ridgeline, Carroll County, Virginia. January. The cold and the dark, and 40 years of a man who knows this ground. And a sound from the south slope that had no name in 40 years of experience. Blue told him to go. Blue had never been wrong. Luther went. That is the whole story in 3 sentences, but it is worth knowing the rest of it. It is worth knowing the 40 years of trust that made those 3 sentences possible. It is worth knowing that the reason Luther came home that night was not courage and not training and not the rifle in his hands. It was a 7-year-old walker hound who knew something his handler didn't, and who found a way to say it, and who stayed at his side all the way down the mountain. Blue died in May of that year. Luther has a new pup. He is learning her voice. 9 months old. The quality is visible already. There is something on the south slope of the Fancy Gap Ridge. It listens between its own sounds to hear whether you are coming down toward it. It has been there as long as anyone has run dogs on that ridgeline. Maybe longer. Your dog knows it's there. Your dog always knows. Learn the voice. Trust what it tells you. And when your lead dog, your best dog, the one that has never been wrong, tells you it is time to go, you go. If Dogman reached you somewhere specific tonight, if you have run hounds or hunted with a dog and you know what it means to trust a lead dog's voice, leave me a comment below. Tell me about your dog. Tell me about the best dog you ever ran and what that dog told you that you could not have known on your own. I want those stories. I read every comment. Virginia Blood and Bone continues. More stories coming from the deep timber and the cold ridges of Virginia's mountains. Subscribe and hit the bell. Run your dogs well. Learn their voices. And on the nights when your lead dog goes quiet in mid-bay, in the specific, absolute silence of a dog that has stopped because something made it stop, don't wait to find out what made it stop. Call your dogs in. Come home. Blue would have told you the same thing.